Hey guys, it's Jane. I'm here today to do a taste of video. I haven't done one of these in a while. For those of you who don't know, my taste of videos are basically me just reading an excerpt of a book. Now, the book that I'm reading at the moment is The Word is Murder by Anthony Horowitz. And I came across a really funny bit last night. And so I thought, in honor of March Mystery Madness, I would do a taste of a mystery. So The Word is Murder. It is actually fiction, which I need to say because I got about a quarter of the way in and I couldn't work out if it was fiction or non-fiction and I had to Google it. It's written as though it is true. It's written from first-person perspective. Anthony Horowitz is a character in the story, and the Anthony Horowitz who is a character in the story is a writer who writes the Alex Rider books and does lots of screen work. Anthony Horowitz is one of the main characters. The other main character is this detective, Daniel Hawthorne, who at one point was a homicide detective. It was kicked out of the police force because of an incident, but is such a genius detective they still call him in as a consultant on particularly tricky cases. Anyway, Hawthorne knows Horowitz because he also works, Hawthorne works as a consultant on certain TV type things where there are police procedural sort of stuff, and he'd met Horowitz as Horowitz was a screenwriter for one of the shows that Hawthorne had been working on. Anyway, Hawthorne is a bit low on cash and has come up with this idea that he gets an author to follow him around and write down what he does, solving a murder mystery, because people love murder mysteries and he thinks he's going to make some money out of it. And almost against his better judgment, Anthony Horowitz gets dragged into this scenario with the detective Hawthorne. And anyway, this passage gives you a taste for that, the fact that it feels as though it's a real thing, and that Anthony Horowitz is kind of fighting his engagement with Hawthorne. Anyway, for better or worse, here we go. The Word is Murder. I'd been drawn into the world of Tintin in a rather strange way. I'd originally been invited to work on the computer game that would have gone out with the first film, The Secret of the Unicorn, working with the French company who just had a huge hit with Assassin's Creed. This isn't something I would normally consider. I don't play computer games. I don't particularly like them, and writing random dialogue for nameless pirates wandering around the deck of the Unicorn didn't particularly appeal to me, even if, in an early draft, I had them all earnestly discussing my books. But the truth is that Spielberg is Spielberg, and I wondered where the job might take me. It took me to Wellington and the home of Peter Jackson. Somehow I found myself drawn into the sequel, just as the first film was nearing completion. Even more bizarrely, it turned out that The Secret of the Unicorn had problems, and almost by accident I was asked to help with the shape and narrative flow, even to add a few extra scenes. Some of these actually made the final cut. There's a tiny moment in the film where a man runs into a lamppost. He falls to the floor, and in the style of a Urge illustration, a little circle of Tweety birds flutter around his head. But there's a twist. The camera pulls back to reveal that the incident had taken place outside a pet shop, and the birds are real, and the owner is there with a net trying to recapture them. I mention this only because it was filmed by Steven Spielberg, and in all the writing I've ever done over 40 years, it's probably the scene of which I'm most proud. When he showed it to me in a Los Angeles screening room, I almost leapt off the sofa in excitement. This was the man who had shot Jaws, E.T., Indiana Jones, Schindler's List, and now his filmography included 40 Seconds by Me. In fact, when I look back at the entire Tintin experience, that's the moment I like to remember. Nothing else was ever quite as good again. That said, I did love working with Peter Jackson. In fact, I'd liked him from the moment I met him at the Weta Studios in Wellington. He showed me a long corridor with a stationery cupboard about halfway down. This was actually the secret entrance to his office. He pressed a button and the back walls swung open on hidden hydraulics, revealing a huge space behind. A secret door! The Tintin books are full of them. I even have one, although it's much less elaborate, in my home in London. Jackson was such a pleasant, even-tempered, amicable man that it was easy to forget that with The Lord of the Rings, he had written, produced and directed 3 of the most successful blockbusters in cinema history, making himself hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. Nothing about the way he dressed or the way he lived fitted with the stereotype of a movie mogul. After that first meeting, we usually worked at his house, which I remember being messy, cosy, lived in. When it was time for lunch, his assistant would phone one of the Wellington takeaways, and the food was awful. Together we had decided to adapt one of Hergé's double albums, The 7 Crystal Balls and The Prisoners of the Sun. The story begins with a group of professors who stumble, Tutankhamun style, on the tomb of the high priest Raska Karpak. They're searching for an ancient bracelet which has magical properties and which will in turn lead to the Incas' lost city of gold, or something like that. By the time I'd finished the screenplay, about half the story was Hergé's and quite a bit of it was mine. I'd added 1 or 2 huge action sequences, including a chase on 2 steam trains that turns into a roller coaster ride around the Andes, and a new climax that involved an entire golden mountain being melted down by a primitive laser. We couldn't use the actual ending of the book, An Eclipse, because it had appeared in another very successful film, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, 5 years before. So, that was how things stood as I went into the meeting at the Soho Hotel. Peter Jackson had already told me he had notes, but that was hardly surprising. A screenplay for a film of this size might pass through 20 or 30 drafts before it was ready for production, and I would almost certainly be fired somewhere along the way. I was quite prepared for that. I just hoped I wouldn't be dropped immediately. It would be nice if they let me have 2 or 3 attempts to get the script right. At this stage, incidentally, The Secret of the Unicorn hadn't been released. I'd seen it and I thought it was extraordinary. Spielberg had used a technique called motion capture, which had magically transformed the actors Jamie Bell and Andy Serkis into Tintin and Haddock. Both of them were lined up for the sequel. I arrived at the Soho Hotel at 10 o'clock as I'd been instructed, and I was shown into a room on the first floor with a large conference table, 3 glasses and a bottle of Fiji mineral water. Peter Jackson arrived a few minutes later. He was as genial as ever, with the crumpled look of someone who'd just flown across the world. He'd lost a lot of weight and his clothes were hanging off him. We talked about London, the weather, recent movies, anything except the script. And then the door opened and Spielberg came in. He tended to wear more or less the same clothes, a leather jacket, jeans, trainers, a baseball cap. His glasses and beard made him instantly recognisable. As always, I had to remind myself that this was really happening, that I was sitting in the same room as him. He was someone I had wanted to meet pretty much my whole life. Spielberg got straight to the point. I'd never come across anyone so focused on filmmaking and storytelling. In the short time that I'd known him, he had never asked me a personal question, and it often struck me that he had no interest in me outside what I had put on the page. I'd been wondering where he would begin. Did he like my way into the narrative? Did the characters work? Were the action sequences in the right place? Were my jokes funny? I always dread the moment when a director opens a script of mine. The first words that come out of his or her mouth may change the next year of my life. "You've chosen the wrong book," he said. It was impossible. Peter and I had discussed which books we were going to adapt when we were in Wellington. I had spent 3 months on this draft. It was the last thing I had expected him to say. "I'm sorry?" I'm not sure those were the exact words that I used. "The 7 Crystal Balls, Prisoners of the Sun, those are the wrong books." "Why?" "I don't want to do them." I turned to Peter. He nodded. "Okay." And that actually was it. It didn't matter that Peter Jackson was directing and Spielberg was producing. They both had copies of my script and we weren't going to discuss it at all. Not the plot, the characters, the action, the jokes. There was nothing to talk about. "We can do Prisoners of the Sun as the 3rd film," Peter said, brushing it aside with a casual wave of his hand. "Which book do you think Anthony should start working on for number 2? "Anthony! That was me! I wasn't going to be fired!" But before Spielberg could answer, the door opened again, and to my shock and utter dismay, Hawthorne walked in. As always, he was in his suit and white shirt, but this time he'd also put on a black tie for the funeral. He didn't seem to have any idea what sort of meeting he'd just interrupted or how important it was to me. He wandered in as if he had been invited, and when he saw me, he smiled as if he hadn't expected me to be there. "Tony," he said, "I've been looking for you." I'm busy, I said, feeling the blood rush to my face. I know, I can see that, mate, but you must have forgotten. The funeral. I told you, I can't come to the funeral. Who's died? Peter Jackson asked. I glanced at him. He looked genuinely concerned. On the other side of the table, Spielberg was sitting very straight, a little annoyed. I could imagine that he belonged to a world where nobody would walk in unless they were expected it, and only if they were being escorted by an assistant. Apart from anything else, there was his security to consider. It's nobody, I said. Still couldn't quite believe Hawthorne had come here. Was he deliberately trying to embarrass me? I told you, I said quietly, I really can't come. But you have to. It's important. Who are you? Spielberg asked. Hawthorne pretended to notice him for the first time. I'm Hawthorne, he said. I'm with the police. You're a police officer? No, he's a consultant, I cut in. He's helping the police with an investigation. A murder, Hawthorne explained helpfully, once again sitting on the first vowel to make the word somehow more violent than it already was. He was looking at Spielberg, only now recognising him. Do I know you? He asked. I'm Steven Spielberg. Are you in films? I wanted to weep. That's right, I make films. This is Steven Spielberg and this is Peter Jackson. I don't know why I said that. Part of me was trying to take back control. Perhaps I was hoping I could overawe Hawthorne and get him out of the room. Peter Jackson! Hawthorne's face brightened. You did those 3 films, The Lord of the Rings. That's right. Jackson was relaxed. Did you see them? I watched them on DVD with my son. He thought they were great. Thank you. The first one, anyway. Wasn't too sure about the second. What was it called? The Two Towers? Peter was still smiling, even if it was a smile that had slightly frozen in place. Yeah, we didn't much like those trees. The talking trees? Yeah, we thought that was stupid. You mean the Ents? Whatever. And Gandalf. I thought he was dead, and I was a bit surprised when he turned up again. Hawthorne thought for a moment, and I waited with a sense of mounting dread for what was going to come next. The actor who played him, Ian McEwan, he was a bit over the top. Sir Ian McKellen? Yeah, he was nominated for an Oscar. Well, that may be the case, but did he win it? Mr. Hawthorne is a special consultant for Scotland Yard, I cut in. I've been commissioned to write a book about his latest case. It's called Hawthorne Investigates, Hawthorne said. Spielberg considered. I like that title, he said. It's good, Jackson agreed. Hawthorne glanced at his watch. We've got the funeral at 11 o'clock, he explained. And I've already said I can't be there. You have to be there, Tony. I mean, everyone who ever knew Diana Cowper is going to attend. It's an opportunity to see them all interacting. You could say it's a bit like having a read-through before a film. You wouldn't want to miss that, would you? I explained. Diana Cowper, Spielberg said. Isn't that Damien Cowper's mother? That's her. She was strangled in her own house. I heard. It had often struck me that Spielberg, the man who had shot the bloodiest opening in cinema history with Saving Private Ryan and who had recreated Nazi atrocities in Schindler's List, didn't actually like talking about violence. I could have sworn he'd gone a little pale once when I was outlining an idea I had for Tintin. Now we turned to Peter. I met Damien Cowper last month. He came in for a chat about Warhorse. Poor kid, Peter Jackson said. It's a horrible thing to happen. I agree. Both Spielberg and Jackson were looking at me as if I had known Damien Cowper all my life and not attending his mother's funeral would be the meanest thing I could possibly do. Meanwhile, Hawthorne was sitting there like some passing angel who'd wafted in to appeal to my better conscience. I really think you should go, Anthony, Spielberg said. But it's just a book, I assured them. To be honest, I'm having second thoughts about writing it. The film is much more important to me. Well, we don't really have much to talk about when the second movie is concerned, Peter said. Maybe we'll need to take a rain check and rethink where we are in a couple of weeks. We can do a conference call, Spielberg said. We'd been talking about Tintin for less than 2 minutes. My script had been thrown out in its entirety. And before I could start coming up with ideas for the Calculus Affair or Destination Moon or even Flight 714 to Sydney, spaceships. Spielberg liked spaceships, didn't he? I was being thrown out. It wasn't fair. I was in a meeting with the 2 greatest filmmakers in the world. I was meant to be writing a film for them, and yet I was being dragged to a funeral of someone I hadn't even met. Hawthorne got to his feet. It tells you something about my state of mind that I hadn't even noticed when he sat down. Very nice to meet you, he said. Sure, Spielberg said. Do please pass on my condolences to Damien. I'll do that. And don't worry, Anthony, we'll give your agent a call. They never did call my agent. Anyway, that's all for me today. I hope you're well. Talk to you later. Bye.